Hello, today is Wednesday, April 2nd. Welcome to episode 434 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI fellow Jessica Jones, and I'm joined today by NSI Deputy Executive Director Martha Miller and two of our favorite senior fellows, Morgan Vina and Amy Mitchell. All right, team. Happy Liberation Day. You might have missed it. This is the day President Trump has been talking about for a long time. It's the day the administration plans to implement a series of tariffs aimed at addressing trade balances and bolstering domestic industry. At the time of recording, we record in the morning. We don't actually know the exact tariffs that are going to that have been put out, but proposals have ranged from a universal 20% tariff on imports to targeted reciprocal tariffs, basically mirroring any tariffs that have been placed on U.S. goods. And the measures, unlike some that have come out previously, are meant to take effect immediately. So there's no more delays and extensions. So folks have been talking about Liberation Day for a while. That the pros tariffs have enlisted, various responses from within the U.S. here domestically. There's been pushback and concern amongst a broad swath of industries. For example, in agriculture, the White House has already announced they might have to, give some emergency support to farmers. Car makers got an extension from their first set of tariffs. It's a big topic here in the U.S. And what might also be the first rebuke to the tariffs, the Senate came out yesterday with a resolution to end the emergency declaration enabling tariffs against our neighbors to the north in Canada. So we might see the first signs of congressional opposition. Internationally, the response has been, one of caution and also preparation, smart friends and allies. In Asia, we've heard talk of China, Japan, and South Korea potentially, coordinating a joint response to tariffs. We've heard about European nations doing likewise, planning to retaliate across steel, aluminum, textiles, et cetera. The European Union, for the first time, is deciding whether to hit one of the U.S.'s most lucrative exports, which is billions of dollars worth of digital services. So that could potentially hit our American tech companies. A lot of talk has been around China. President Trump has talked about having a phone call with Chinese President Xi Jinping soon, which hasn't been put on the calendar. And we're all kind of wondering what brings China to the negotiation table. So there's a lot to cover on this Liberation Day. So first, Morgan, I'm going to turn to you to lay the scene for us. What's going on?
Right. So this has been a day one priority for the president. In recent days, he's been inclined apparently to be more aggressive on the tariffs, even putting universal tariffs back on the table. This is going to be a big splash in the Rose Garden later today. And I think we're all sort of waiting to see what will actually be included. Things that I'm watching right now. First, who is not retaliating? I think it's interesting that EU, Canada, and Vietnam actually have not put out announced tariffs yet or retaliatory tariffs. I know Canada in particular has delayed its retaliatory tariffs on steel and aluminum in particular. I think it's also interesting that Canada and Mexico could be back on the hook to receive a 25% IEEPA tariff unless Trump extends his March executive order that essentially provides the USMCA all the goods under the USMCA preferential treatment. And then thirdly, what is the pain threshold for the U.S. business community? Jess, as you mentioned, the business community has been very vocal in their concerns about how this is going to impact their bottom line. I'll note that many companies have actually anticipated that these tariffs would be coming. And so as a result, they actually front loaded a lot of their imports and as a result actually drove up the trade deficit. So that's one thing. Also, on the plus side, though, it's also caused the U.S. business community to take a hard look about how they are going to be reinvesting in the United States. And clearly, this would be, a boon for U.S. Domestic manufacturing, which has really suffered in the last few decades. So. Also, what are their asks from the Trump administration? What is their approach going to be? Are they going to be a hair on fire, like this is going to kill the U.S. business community, or are they going to be more conciliatory and try to sort of work with the Trump administration to find a path forward here? In terms of what is next, I will note that today April 2nd is just the starting point, right? I think this is the day that negotiations with our trading partners really do begin. We've heard a bit about the Mar-a-Lago Accords, which I think is Trump's effort to completely remake and restructure the U.S. global trading system. This could focus on everything from dollar overvaluation, reshoring U.S. manufacturing, reducing the trade deficit. It also could look at secondary trade deficits and all of the baddies like Russia, Venezuela, Iran, and others. So ultimately, though, I think we'll have to wait a few hours to see what the what the final product is. But again, today is the starting point.
So Martha Morgan brings up, the Mar-a-Lago Accords, which potentially could upend our global economy, and she also talked about pain thresholds. Right? There's a big delta between the average American, average consumer, and the remaking of our global economy. I mean, how do you think this begins to play out? Where does politics start to push back on what are this potentially huge change?
So I think this is actually such a fascinating topic. Obviously, there's the economic, just more like the theoretical piece of this. But then when it gets to our, the voters, it gets interesting because, I think this is supposedly intended to help your average American. It's supposed to help with the deficit. But once you have, retaliatory tariffs, which are coming, and they could be really bad. And it could affect big tech. It could affect financial and other professional services. It could actually affect bank transfers if the EU, for example, brings in the anti-coercion instrument. So think about it from this standpoint. Tariffs are a tax because eventually these will raise prices for consumers. It's basically a tax on the poor because people who are wealthy can absorb the increase in costs. This will be very tough for businesses, for consumers. And what's interesting to me is this seems to be the first issue where Republicans have been vocally opposing President Trump. So we have Susan Collins, Tom Tillis, Lisa Murkowski, Chuck Grassley, and, I guess not surprisingly, Rand Paul. All senators who, who he needs to push through his agenda. And, they're not going to speak up unless they're hearing things from their constituents. And so I think the lesson here, applying it to other policy areas is that if voters voice their concerns, the members of Congress will have to listen and they will have to speak up and rebuke the president. And also, the fact that this is the one issue where they're speaking up pretty prominently, that goes to show how big of a deal it is and how concerned they are. So that is going to be, I think this will be a very interesting kind of litmus test to see, how much Republicans will push back on President Trump, how much leeway they have to do so with their constituencies. And, sadly, I think they're correct in their assessment that this is not going to be good. So I would call today Liberation from Low Prices Day, liberation from affordability. So that's my,
Martha Miller for president in 2028. You heard it here first. Amy, so what's the what's the rationale behind Mar-a-Lago Accords? What is President Trump trying to achieve? And, what could be, Martha's brought up some of the risks associated with it. Like what are some larger geopolitical risks that might come across, that might happen?
Well, I think it's interesting just to go back to Morgan's point about the announcement. He's actually making the announcement at, I think, 4 p.m. when the markets will have closed to try to stave off any immediate reaction. But we'll know pretty early tomorrow morning when the markets open again in Asia. Long term, what he's trying to do is bring back manufacturing to the U.S. And the problem is he's basing this off of a worldview that is centered around 1987, at which time, thanks to our friend James Rosen, who is a great reporter, pulled up a New York Times op-ed that the president wrote, then just Donald Trump, in 1987 and said, "Make Japan, Saudi Arabia, and others pay for the protection we extend as allies. Let's help our farmers, our sick, our homeless by taking from some of the greatest profit machines ever created, machines created and nurtured by us. Tax these wealthy nations, not America. End our huge deficits, reduce our taxes, and let America's economy grow unencumbered by the cost of defending those who can easily afford to pay us for the defense of their freedom. Let's not let our great country be laughed at anymore." So he's using a worldview that's 40 years old, that was based on a worldview that was 40 years earlier than that, a World War II model. So I think, we're starting to see, as Martha noted, some resistance, especially in the Senate, and they've proposed some other bills, particularly Senators Cassidy and Graham, using what they're calling targeted tariffs, specifically a carbon or pollution tariff. And that would actually penalize our adversaries like China, who have made a lot of money off of cheaper goods by lowering their environmental standards as we've increased ours. And, kind of rough estimates right now, based on a pollution tariff just against China, would realize 100 billion over 10 years. At the same time, it would penalize China by about 115 billion over 10 years. So these types of kind of more targeted solutions are more adept at today's kind of interconnected economy, and more aligned with the reasoning of, or kind of the de facto today, national and economic security being tied together. So you're hitting our adversaries through these targeted tariffs versus our allies against a wide, swath of tariffs. And I think part of it is, in 1987, the US was dominant in world economies. I don't think we can make that same argument today. And so Europe has a finite amount of money coming in right now. Europe is not the wealthy kind of bloc that it once was. And so we're going to penalize those who have been with us and have stood with us on the battlefield for kind of the market shifts that our adversaries have created.
Well, unfortunately, Amy, I think targeted tariffs aren't happening. Though I'm excited. I don't think that's the right word, to see what happens in the Rose Garden later today. I will say that I read a story that President Trump does want to pave over the Rose Garden and put a patio. So this might be one of our last Rose Garden announcements. Who knows? Okay, folks, that's a wrap. Thanks so much to Kelly Crowley, Claude Jennings, and the entire NSI team and their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Friday, maybe a fun Friday, who knows, April 4th for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. We're on YouTube, so check out Amy's cool glasses connector that she's rocking today. I love it. I want some. And if you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Fun.